YouTube, the most efficient social network of all time, the most efficient showcase of creativity of the internet since 2005, in which people used to upload low-effort clips without the urge concern about quality. Ladies driving trucks, choking chickens, dudes showing snowboarding skills, switching on the PSP, emulating Peter Gabriel's Sledgehammer music video, or even commenting on the exact length of elephants' trunks.
Really long trunks.
These relics may not have aged particularly well, but the fact they're essentially the beginning of everything definitely adds further charm to their role. Back in 2007, I used to walk out believing YouTube was the home for Phil Army-like dweebs, because that was the tidal wave I had been drowning in as the ultimate form of entertainment. Fortunately, in early 2010s, YouTube was growing as a platform, leaving more room for organic videos about specific topics influencers wanted to discuss, such as cinema, video games, or makeup art. Despite the birth of Dailymotion, Vimeo, or the late Google Video, not even the copyright restrictions could stop the explosion of YouTube, as the Red website had plenty of lookalikes scattered all over, but none of them is like that Red website. Back in 2012, I obviously didn't bother to think about what to do for a living, since I was still a minor, yet I was terribly keen on voice acting. It was on top of my personal goals. I didn't think of anything else, because I only had this in mind like Ray Charles with Georgia. There was literally no plan B. I was driven by my own determination, as well as by a good deal of naivety, considering it would turn out to be a flash in the pan in 2017. Nevertheless, I didn't care, because I still believed the right occasion would wait for me anyhow, and spoiler alert, it wouldn't. Procrastinating too much wouldn't sound as disastrous for a 23-year-old yours truly, until I realize I'm nearly my 30s and still haven't decided what to do for a living. The voice acting dream completely took me away from reality, and all I could gauge was a dense fog, because I acknowledged no other job would engage me as much as voice acting. Not even being a bartender in my parents' business could erase my numbness, since picking unemployment isn't exactly like picking the flavor of your popsicle. Mint, black cherry, or peach tea. By the way, the latter doesn't taste bad at all. Therefore, I'm apparently not as doomed as I dreaded, but I still realized that something was missing, but never bothered to find a concrete solution. Right until August 2022, when I officially decided to stop messing around and to get back on track. What used to be a mere hobby became an endeavor. What used to be a side project became the main occupation.
We are going to analyze an episode from Last House, in particular episode 83 of Frieza Saga.
And no, I didn't mention this very channel, opened in 2016, was actually treated more like a game, because again, I had different ideas in store. For starters, I had begun editing and creating videos in 2012 with this machinery over here, which were essentially commercial collections separated by movie maker transitions. I remember digging the beer ads above all. I used to find their campaign quite imaginative, despite taking full advantage of shameless stereotypes of men going wild over hops to the detriment of everything else. Women? Who needs them when you have beer? But what can I say, those commercials were the shit back then, as they were also aware of their manipulative media powers. I literally put zero effort on these videos, my goal was only to have a good time, no ulterior motive. However, I soon realized editing videos isn't enough if you don't have a specific talent that makes you stand out. Or in short, what will the main topic be? You just can't go uploading commercial profusions. It's not a unique content, you have to work it out. Personally, I was born without a particular talent. I cannot sing, I cannot draw that well, I loathe dancing, drama isn't my cup of tea, so what could I do? The first answer that came to mind was to review questionable movies, more or less like the Nostalgia Critic, which I did upload in early 2016 elsewhere. Though nothing too mind-blowing, those videos were a bit too derivative, trying to throw some forced tantrums over films like Dragon Ball Evolution. Therefore, I immediately found out it wasn't the brightest solution, given the scarce views, and I had to move on differently. So what now? Should I even bother to create another channel? Well, I apparently did open it, in the most random situation possible, writing captions in English. How come? Why not in Italian? Like I said, everything was random from start to finish. Fun fact, I didn't even study English at primary school. It had French as foreign language. What are even yachts? Non so esattamente se i numeri sarebbero superiori parlando la mia lingua. Probabilmente parleremmo di un ulteriore rimpianto, ma alla fine della fiera è tutto un continuo se, non esiste una realtà assoluta. Besides, if there is something I learned across 7 long years is keep a precise identity of what you do in your channel regardless of your numbers. Never stop, so please don't follow my example, and leave your private business out of this, because the audience doesn't care about your personal dramas, but at the same time wants to know any single detail about your intimacy, so be careful. The only thing that matters is the content you bring, everything else is nonsense. That said, considering my channel as objectively never being that massive, it was mandatory for me to choose the right topic, preferably something nobody or only a few people do. A few months ago, I pointed out what made me want to ID animators to begin with, since watching animated media for the sole sake of it doesn't please me anymore. Sure, erasing ignorance sounds like the hardest task, but at least viewers seem to show a bit more appreciation towards the authorized personnel across these 7 years, which is already a step up. And remember that tutorial of how to break down animation released a while ago? Why did it have no part 2? Because I already made a part 2 of it, like here, here, here or here. Part 2 easily means to put the theory into practice, which is what I'm going to do in this special occasion for a matter of things coming full circle. In fact, I started a Dragon Ball Rewatch project in 2019 that never encountered a proper conclusion. So I thought, why not wrapping the events up now, on my 7th birthday? We're indeed tackling the final canon episodes of the Buu arc, as well as the end of Dragon Ball Z altogether. One more time, cause this sounds like the rightful occasion to celebrate 7 years of this ramshackle channel. Welcome to a new journey written by yours truly at 6 AM. First of all, why the end of the Buu arc of such a polarizing arc, and not a more critically acclaimed one like the 23rd Tenkaichi Budokai or the Saiyan arc? Well, there is an explanation for it. Original Dragon Ball and the Saiyan arc 2 were completely outsourced, and the various studios didn't really feature drastic changes within, apart from a few uncredited animators like in episode 23, with Ebizawa, Nakatsuru and Ide of all people supporting Aoshima Sentry. So I thought it wouldn't be the case to dissect episodes with the same studio rotation over and over, in favor of a more unpredictable scenario. Specifically, these final episodes could avail nearly anyone but Shigeyasu Yamauchi, whose last direction in Z occurs in 283 due to Path to Power production, which demonstrates Toei's goal to wrap up such a wobbly arc on a positive note, in spite of a few questionable picks we're claiming later in the video. If you watched my dissection of Goku vs Buu, you might know that battle stands out from the rest in the anime because it's not as unimpressive and shaky as the majority of this arc. It exhibits names like Yamauchi or Ueda in the directional department, Toei Animator's cockpit and the return of Seigasha to depict the action as engaging as possible. Sure enough, I claim that portion exceeds the manga in any possible way, from the narration to the overall execution. After 281, Ebizawa and Uchiyama supervise the subsequent episodes, and since there's nothing much to comment on, I'd immediately fast forward to 284, second to last K-production entry before the end of the series. While I'm not sure about the why, Shingo Ishikawa's studio was gradually reduced to lowest terms, as Shigeki Sato, Miyako Jingu, Mitsue Ogawa and Hiroyuki Yokota left midway through, with only Ishikawa himself and Atsushi Matsumoto as the remaining regulars, more or less like Uchiyama and Noara at Last House. As such, their episodes also feature some more supportive names like Tetsuya Saiki, Noriko Shibata, Ohara himself, or the other Seigasha half. and this episode represents no exception with 3 very familiar entities. Method-wise, Ishikawa doesn't propose anything different from the other Ishikawa from Super, Osamu, as they both follow Yamamuro's character sheets quite accurately with minor changes. Overall, a quite solid interpretation of the Yamamuro-esque countenance, even though his episodes don't impress as much animation-wise. I always found their movements a bit too simplistic, and here's no surprise. Ishikawa likely takes on the beginning, with the whole planet and its inhabitants being restored, with some pale and hideous Uchiyama-esque figures in between, and Piccolo and the others wondering what actually happened. Notice how much they're feeling uncertain about Gohan's eyelines in its base form. Such a doubt would be dragged even in modern days, up until Dragon Ball Super Hero, with his eyelines being open as they should. It's also likely Ishikawa is responsible for the Kadawi and Sakami's palace and Dabura in heaven, but the only chunk of action in the first half might be animated by Matsumoto. Beside his Genghis, there's not much evidence about his very approach. I might assume his shading and profile shots look slightly different from Ishikawa, tending to resemble Naoki Tate's profiles more or less in more than an occasion, but his action is mostly decent in spite of some neat smears and impact frames. Admittedly, the battle of the two Boos isn't the main pivot, as Vegeta explains to the mankind via Kaiu's telepathy that he needs their help in order to defeat Boo by giving their energy to form a Super Genkidama, and I have to admit it's an improvable scene altogether. Possibly due to Katsuhito Kikuchi's recent involvement in 280, his direction feels a bit lacking here. We do get a decent shot of Vegeta speaking to the whole planet, but the commonplace framings and music placement don't compel as much. Speaking of which, the Genkidama theme from the movie Kikuchi himself directed is going to be used in the next 2 episodes as well, which quite frankly sounds like a considerable downgrade over the other Genkidama theme for the Thales film. It's not bad, but the Celine Dion-esque chorus sounds a bit too bombastic for my taste. Anyway, Matsumoto likely handles this section as well as the final cuts of the first act, with Goku preparing his Genkidama, but once the second half begins, any doubt is dispelled as Toshiyuki Kanno returns to animate the following scene, with Vegeta shuddering with excitement and the gang at Kami's palace giving their Genki without hesitation. This art is heavily redrawn by Ishikawa reasonably, since he too appeared in 280, which justifies his limited contribution in this episode. Then again, his tremors are so unmistakably distracting. Then, once Kaio notices the Genkidama is supposed to actually be bigger than this, Ishikawa takes on a massive portion of the second half, which also involves more Boo vs Boo and their shenanigans, like bites and multiform, and Vegeta realizing humans are idiots. Even though it's a bit too derivative art-wise, I'm still quite fond of his young Yamamuro-like supervision, definitely the main attraction of K-Production since the action is solid yet not too great. Though seems like the situation is getting dire as Vegeta is unable to convince mankind to cooperate and Kid Boo easily overpowers Fat Boo's shenanigans. So Akira Nagami handles Fat Boo's desperate offensive, draining him completely and leaving Vegeta not putting up with humans BS any longer. Despite he was in 280 like Kanno indeed, his performance is slightly more pleasing, as Ishikawa doesn't get to correct him a lot. So we get to observe some nice looking expressions on both Vegeta and Kaio, including the latter's eyeballs, as well as his trademark impact frames. I seldom watched a more Nagami-esque scene than this one, which unfortunately isn't Takeoide's case, as he appears in the final cutscenes with Frieza and Hell laughing at Vegeta's failure and the mankind's stupidity exasperating the protagonists. His contribution may be even more limited than Kanno and Nagami's, but he remains a top-notch artist. The final 2 shots are top quality, with no trace of Ishikawa's corrections either. Overall, you can tell Toei is struggling to illustrate the final stage of the Boo arc, even if it means to resort to unorthodox overtime. I wouldn't regard it as more remarkable than that threesome, but remains a pretty solid effort. Now this is where things get quite fishy, since 285 and 286 depict the official end of the main conflict, and the most suitable assignment would be the Akamada Imamura appearing on the former and the Yamamuro Ueda on the latter, since Yamamura is the better artist and Ueda the better director on paper. For sure, Toei's intent to provide a superior rendition of the arc has been quite noble this far. Accordingly, assigning 286 to Akamada apparently doesn't seem to make much sense. I mean, the Z anime has objectively been unpredictable when it comes to conclude the different canon arcs, since the Saiyan arc finale was as great as the Cell Games ending, with the Namek arc conclusion being the only serious dud. Then how come would Studio Carpenter get to handle the long-awaited epilogue in spite of their commonplace performance? Well, I guess there is a reason for it, even if it doesn't hold up much, but we'll get to that later, since now it's the turn of episode 285. Before addressing Yamamura's contribution, let's talk about Atsushi Maekawa's script for a moment. It is a mixed bag. On one hand, I do appreciate the cameos of overlooked characters like Upa, Bora, Suno, Hatsuchan, Yajirobe, Tenshinhan, and even Lunch actively partaking in Goku's Genkidama. And the 17th scene makes sense for him to give his Genki too, even though he has never met Goku or even heard his voice at this point, as they would also explain on Super. However, if I may understand why Giran and Uranai Baba's warriors wouldn't cooperate when Goku told them to, since they might hold a grudge against him, why wouldn't Namu support Goku's plea? I mean, he's shown giving his Genki only after Mr. Satan's request. Did he forget the Tenkaichi Budokai? Well, what about that conversation with Jackie Chun about his students? And before you say it, no, Goku's Pat wasn't canon, so it's not bearing a grudge for immodesty's sake. It feels so off, more or less as much as Vegeta not transforming while stalling. Then again, it doesn't appear to have sufficient ki after being resurrected according to Goku's words, which sounds a bit too far-fetched. Now then, this is the last of Yamamura in the canon series, once again proving to be top-notch in this era, as his artwork looks as perfect as ever. In spite of a slightly unpleasant facial gloss near the end of Vegeta, his supervision manages to excel no less. His characters do leave the impression of capturing the quintessential DBS countenance, I dare to say, even more than Minoru Maeda ever did, because Yamamura's output only evolved for the best across the 90s, thus showing the results of years of ground floor under Mitsuru Shindo. Although, no matter how dominant his figure is, Shindo Pro will never be as complete as Seigasha, for example, since Seigasha avails of both strong supervision and unit, whereas Shindo Pro can purely rely on Yamamura's persona only, since their episodes seldom stood out animation-wise, and here's no exception. It's like having Messi in an otherwise average team, that's essentially the impression it tends to leave. In any case, the beginning with Vegeta begging Earthlings to help them is perhaps taken on by Kazue Kinoshita, judging from the Goku shot used more than once across Part A, yet it's still unsure when exactly his cut ends, whether it includes Vegeta being fed up with the folk stubbornness as well. I assume Kid Buu beating Fat Buu to a pulp might be animated by someone else, but Mr. Satan hitting Buu with a rock is definitely Noriko Shibata's effort. Under Shindo, her work was definitely easier to spot due to her extremely angular eyes, which made her characters look more evil, but if you consider her subsequent Genghis, you can tell she was kinda inspired by Yamamura's evolution, as her traits look nowhere as borderline as under Shindo, as though she was trying to keep up with his talent, despite her key animation looking still too rigid to hazard a fair comparison. Once Buu finds out the Genkidama, Vegeta decides to buy some time while leaving the hard task to convince humanity to Goku, receiving a severe beating in the process. The two close-ups of Goku are definitely Kinoshita's work, but the rest is again uncertain. It's not a particularly complex scene apart from some neat ground animation while Buu is dashing towards the Genkidama. Yamamura of course doesn't make IDing names much easier, but at least the next montage is confirmed to be Kumiko Rikoshi's effort, in which Tenshinhan, Yajirobe and the older acquaintances give their Genki to Goku, resulting in a rather pleasant scene that uses the true Genkidama theme. No cap, it's just so much better than the one from the 10th movie. The first half follows a strange assignment, as the stomach punch is animated by Shibata, but the rest but Goku's close-ups is handled by Yamamura himself, who would pop up again in the second half, on Piccolo telling Gohan and the others to try to convince humans. This part actually bugs me a bit, since it's got some great drawings of Gohan, with his closed eye lines again, but also Miyahara-esque Piccolo, which I'm not a massive fan of. Back to Kaioshin's realm, Goku's desperate attempt to get some Genki appears to be Horikoshi's scene, but the very next segment confuses me a bit more, since it's either handled by Kimiseki or Nobuyuki Arata. Not even the concrete evidence of Arata's work during GT can help dissolve my doubts. Goku's ear and mouth don't look the Yamamoro-like, but I presume it doesn't offer sufficient evidence to assign a proper ID. Lastly, after Goku insults humans, not even Satan can stand how selfishly they act, so he succeeds in what two Saiyans couldn't, finally convincing them to give their Genki in order to complete a Super Genki-Dama, because the World Champion's good word shall never be questioned. At long last, the Genki-Dama is complete, to Goku and Vegeta's satisfaction, Boo's horror, and Satan's astonishment, so Goku is ready to attack the pink enemy once and for all, ending the episode. I have to say, it's not a great one by any means. I do have a few complaints on the writing, since Namu ignoring Goku's plea kinda bothers me as much as the panic caused by Piccolo's sole presence, which is kinda offhand if we do consider no such thing occurred during the Tenkaichi Budokai, despite entering as Ma Jr., which is already stupid to begin with. Overall, solid episode. Yoshihiro Ueda is normally a creative director, but his output feels reasonably weaker than in 281, and Yamamoro supervised far better episodes like 185, again with Ueda boarding Gohan slaughtering the Cell Juniors, and 232 with Yamauchi's notable cinematography as the main protagonist. 286, the conclusion of the final battle, is supervised by Yuji Akamada and Studio Carpenter, who debuted during the Cell games like Cockpit, yet not receiving a likewise enthusiastic feedback, since Akamada's entries aren't known for being visually captivating and not particularly expressive either, especially when different characters like Gohan and Goten happen to look exactly the same in a GT episode. Again, why would Toei assign such a crucial episode to an unremarkable supervisor? Their main point would be rotation issues, since Carpenter's the only studio who hasn't appeared since Boo landed on Kaioshin's realm, especially if the three regulars are supported by Toei's usual suspects we're uncovering later. Retrospectively, having Takahiro Imamura handle the so desired conclusion doesn't sound too bad either, because he's a quite creative director too, as also seen in GT and in the Digimon series, even though his performance isn't always massively consistent, specifically in products like One Piece or Super itself, but again, I can accept that. In fact, the beginnings delivered quite solidly, with Imamura using smoke as transitions from a cut to another, simple yet effective device, also offering an appropriate music placement to describe Goku's deadlock, since he can't throw the Genki-Dama unless Vegeta moves away from the spot, leaving a huge advantage to the pink foe, who can attack freely. The segment is heavily redrawn by Akamada, but I don't think it's his direct key animation, because he tends to draw wounds as if they were placed around a half circle. I have zero clue on the true ID. Might even be some sort of outsider like Hitoshi Kamata out of elimination, but again, I don't have sufficient proof. Nonetheless, just when everything appears to be over, heavily injured Chubby Boo stops Kid Boo's offensive, allowing Satan to save Vegeta and Goku to finally fire Super Genki-Dama, which proves to be a world champion worthy class act. Such a class act requires a likewise worthy execution, as Takeyuki Manaka seems to handle the following segment, as suggested by Goku's different wounds, resulting in arguably his best work in the series. It definitely looks very animated for Carpenter standards. His background animation takes full advantage of Imamura's camera work, also exhibiting some unlikely fidelity to the source material on Goku's struggle beams or the framing of Boo blocking the Genki-Dama. However, it's too soon to cry victory, because Goku is unable to muster more power and Boo is actually on the verge to bounce the energy sphere back. So this pretty competent sequence marks the end of part A, with part B illustrating a not so dissimilar situation, as Akamada animates a good chunk of exposition, with Boo now prevailing and Vegeta demanding more Genki, whose request happens to be undoable though, because humans are utterly exhausted and one more push would definitely kill them. Nevertheless, Vegeta doesn't care, as he gently orders Satan to carry on this deadly harvest, which coincides with Akamada's last cuts as Toshiyuki Kanno comes back to illustrate Satan's reluctance. His presence after only 2 episodes puzzles quite a lot, but by now Toei's intent is pretty clear, as animators like Kanno, Ide, Shida, and Inagami represented their perfect comfort zone. Therefore, their presence during the big climax is never to be questioned, even if it means to sacrifice their available time. In fact, Kanno's contribution can be described as a mere miracle. Akamada only partially redrew his eyelines, but other traits like his big, evil jaws are essentially intact, not to mention his tremors, distracting as ever. Besides, Vegeta finally remembers they still have one wish left, so a pretty evil looking Dende asks Porunga to restore Goku's energy, leading to Shingo Ishikawa's section, with Buu bouncing back the Genkidama and Goku getting his energy restored. His contribution is reasonably restrained, yet competent. His art looks fairly recognizable with some true background animation, and at last Goku can turn Super Saiyan and counterattack for real, which happens to be a massively redrawn Ide key animation. It's not astonishing to reckon his guest presence as the smallest of the bunch, given his involvement in 284, but at least his trademark artifact allows us to erase any doubt in the matter, and that Buu pose looks a bit Ide-esque too. But after about 60 long episodes, it appears the nightmare of Buu is coming to an end, as he can no longer deflect the Super Genkidama that is about to disintegrate any single rubbery cell of his, leading to the notorious monologue of Son Goku acknowledging the enemy's value and wishing he was reincarnated as a good guy to fight him again. This cathartic moment is animated by Carpenter regular Shinichiro Fukushima, whose execution is frustratingly endearing, because it's handled so well in the anime. Both Fukushima and Imamura managed to further improve Toriyama's panels, the use of framings like the wide shot of the Genkidama overwhelming Buu, and an original close-up of him blinking in pain before Goku bids him farewell. Even the panels of the gang rooting for his win shattering before his final push are a clever thinking, whose device would also be retrieved by Kazuya Karasawa in the Tournament of Power. Therefore it means Imamura can indeed display some creative storyboarding, and his presence in a crucial episode is not a bad idea per se. Unfortunately, the minute-long recap not only ruins what this cathartic moment has accomplished, it didn't feel that mandatory. There was possibly no necessity to recycle past clips, because we already know Buu was nearly undefeatable and nearly anyone lost against him. It is frustrating, it is distracting, it didn't have to exist. The scene itself remains satisfying, yet so much better without it. After a nice background animation by Fukushima, Buu is finally no more, so Kanno completes the episode with Goku and Vegeta giving thumbs up for their so desired victory, resulting in another massive upgrade over Toriyama's panels. Overall, a nice conclusion of an otherwise regretful episode that was able to both improve the original manga and to wreck its efforts immediately after. It is indeed regretful, because this is Carpenter's best entry of the series. Imamura's board is pretty good, and so is its music placement. The drama and pathos are portrayed so well during the crisis, but as a whole it doesn't deliver the same chorality as the Saiyan arc or the Cell game's finale, despite not appearing as a sheer train wreck as the Namek arc ending. Bottom line, good performance, yet not particularly stellar. 287 is Seigasha's last entry of Dragon Ball Z, supervised by the guy who drew the very first Seigasha scene of the series, back in episode 4, Kazuya Izada, and boarded and directed by the king of translations Mitsuo Hashimoto right from the title card, preceded by a pixelation of a Majin Buu shot. He simply pulls no punches, as much as Izada's supervision mixing his 2.0 period with his artificial human's arc output, thus allowing the return of chubby cheeks and chins. I have to say, while I do like Izada as an animator, his performance as a supervisor has always bewildered me, as I've never realized how to evaluate him. He's by no means a bad artist, but I admit his tendency to exaggerate suits his movements way more than his drawings, because I've always found his overwhelming overweight figures some sort of hindrance, which never occurred under Shimanuki's cleaner supervision. That being said, I can assume his lipidic redrawing has its positives, like on Tomokichi Takeuchi's intro on New Namek, with the deities and the Namekians celebrating over Goku's triumphing Genkidama as the menace of Buu is finally over. But the same cannot be stated for Takeuchi's stiff and unnatural poses. His shading on fabric and around fingers looks barely recognizable, and Izada did a fairly decent job at correcting his wonky art. Although in the third episode in a row, Gohan's eye lines are closed in one cut, then open in the very next one, and closed in the following. This is going to become permanent for the remainder of the original run, including GT, the 2008 special, Battle of Gods, and 80% of Super, with the strange exception of Resurrection of F and Super Hero. I guess that film did something right after all. Meanwhile, one of the episode's protagonists of Segasha's evolution across the series, Masahiro Shimanuki, recreates Goku one-to-one to the original title page, for once not being exempt from Izada's redrawings, mostly on characters' close-ups, but evidence like his split ends and elf ears is sufficient to confirm his presence. His jerky dramatic acting fits Satan's victory speech to the whole mankind seamlessly, and not even Izada's attempt to redraw his poses from scratch can erase that Shimanuki in front. The crowd is cheering Satan, even at Kami's palace, yet Videl is genuinely embarrassed, which is where Yoko Izuka's involvement kicks in. She's been part of Segasha since the very beginning, mostly known as the Chin Genie, since she draws chins like upside down hills as viewed on Videl, therefore it's not astonishing to expect some more additional Izada-esque corrections like Katon. They overwhelm her drawings. Again, I don't really support this plump rendition of Izada, looks a bit off even though it works when there's not much in betweening, like in Izuka's case. Next up is Naoki Tate's turn, on then the healing Vegeta and Beeroo noticing Fat Buu still lying somewhere unconscious. And the big shocker is indeed alive, to Vegeta's disgust. Not even Tate could dodge Izada's suffocating supervision, but a talent like him is simple to ID thanks to his trademark anticipation, his Minina Katsuru stance and classic profile framing. Satan's intention is to heal his pal, but Vegeta is positively against that, as he threatens to kill both buddies so that they won't have to fight Buu again, but Goku agrees with Satan since without his help there wouldn't be any peace achievement. One more time, the anime is definitely illustrating the events way more accurately than Toriyama, because the manga is dealing with an artist who has long lost its interest and no longer cares whether his panels look that rough around the edges, whereas Megumi Yamashita's version is essentially the polar opposite. Compared to her Seiga fellows, she didn't stand out particularly, but her gentler approach looks quite polished, especially on Vegeta, and the music placement elevates the scene further. It marks its only usage here on Vegeta sparing Buu's life. The reunion segment sadly looks a bit too janky, and Izada's corrections don't help improve it either, which is a pity since it's got some bonus clips by Tate using some fun looking boomerangs, mirrors, and adding some hilarious reactions to Satan introducing Mr. Buu to the gang. This is the hyperbolic tone the Buu arc missed so much, the hyperbolic register that only Seigasha could deliver. I mean, it's so strong it doesn't even need any dialogue beside the narrator. The gang's belief of being forced to fight again after all they had to put through is expressed so well by Tate's poses filled with several emotions such as fright and assurance. He's always been that skilled, as he also recreates the Goku panel 1-to-1 in which he states to be ready to return to his mortal living, finishing part A, whereas Izada tackles Goku wishing for the humanity to remove Buu's nasty memories from their minds so that he can hang out without causing any sort of PTSD. I've personally been looking forward to analyzing this part because A, it's Mr. Buu's first involvement in a Seigasha entry, since he was still locked in his cocoon in 231, and B, this is what I consider a good filler, as it establishes his personality by letting him face some trivial activities, like desiring ice cream and getting money, whose outcome can't help but entertain due to Buu's hopeless naivety. Each one of these skits never feels contrived, quite the contrary, Buu's reactions are what make this filler gold. Izuka's segment includes him hanging around and becoming livid inside the ice cream parlor, but immediately stops once he recalls Satan's advice. Then Takeuchi strikes back on the Kung Fu Master segment, whom Buu offers to fight only because he believes it's a game, and the result is easily predictable, but once more, his unawareness feels totally in line with his personality, as he never experienced an event like this one ever before. As for Takeuchi's performance, Izada narrowly saves it, mostly redrawing his sci-fi art, but also leaving finger shading, smoke and impact frames intact, so Buu can finally enjoy his deserved ice cream, but Bulma needs his help to carry her grocery bags. And considering her countenance, you can easily deduce this Tate still played it safe when it comes to draw ladies, both physically and emotionally. Nevertheless, the one who enjoys adding more charm and beauty to girls remains Shimanuki, as he takes on the entire jewelry store section, in which the two robbers meet up with Buu again, while he's crunching jewels, not finding them too tasty. Another golden scene, since Bulma and Buu are the only ones not to feel any sort of tension they're in, with the former being in a sore mood and the latter treating the robbery like a game. As such, they don't even need the police or the great Saiyaman duo to intervene, as soon as Buu deflects the bullet with laughable ease. The rigid poses, the dramatic action lines, the industrial sweating, Shimanuki's performance is always warranted, whether it's about comedy or drama. The final segment may be irrelevant content-wise, but feels quite poetic if we start realizing the animator who began the Segasha's trick in Z actually wraps it up here, since it's Kazuya Izada's work. His extravagant poses and spiky visual effects are so him. He simply knows how to handle different reactions, from the best buddy's amusement to Vidal's second-hand embarrassment, ending the entire episode on a rather vulgar note. From Goku and Piccolo fearing Raditz to him nonchalantly exposing his gonads in front of everyone, Izada's definitely come a long way across over 200 episodes. This is the last of Segashi in Z. They didn't get to shine much in the Buu arc, but whenever they do, they're always spectacular. Quality over quantity. The good animation studio appreciated during the early arcs has managed to become the best studio of the original run, made great by the three tenors. As for the minor half, I think they deserved a lot more respect as well, since Takeuchi, Izuka and Yamashita supported some other studios during the middle portion, such as Carpenter, K-Production and even Cockpit, while Shimanuki, Izada and Tate were working on the film productions. Bottom line, if 281 was an all-around great episode, 287 wouldn't be as effective without Sega Power, as it showcases why they are so highly regarded. Nevertheless, I'm tired of bringing positive vibes. Now it's time for some gratuitous hate, which can only be brought by a bad episode like 288, the infamous party filler. It's supervised by Last House and directed by Osamu Kazai, who at least knows how to deliver some true atmosphere and soothing vibes. He made his debut during the late Piccolo Daimao arc, but oddly left after the Saiyan arc to be back on track during the Otherworld tournament filler. And since the Uchiyama Ohara handover would make me quite repetitive, in this case I'm actually going to debunk a thorny topic, filler. If you ask a One Piece fan, they'll possibly dislike its use, because it interferes with the canon plot and does nothing but drag out its narration. What about Dragon Ball then? Personally, I've never cared for the canon filler debate, since what matters the most is how it's been handled. Is it good, bad, entertaining, dull? First of all, the long-standing question, is Dragon Ball filler always bad? The answer is no. You still have to investigate which filler is notable and or garbage. Overgeneralizing is not the correct solution, as you need to look into the specific material and deduce its pros and cons. Likewise, someone might even suggest the opposite question, is Dragon Ball filler always good? Which will get the same reply, no, because you shouldn't really place some solid expectations on Toei. They can either astound you or deceive you, they're that unpredictable. Then what makes a filler good? Be entertaining, be engaging, be creative, also use different characters, never contradict the source material, and even add some insight, like creating new characters or expanding the world building. For example, the Buu filler in 287 is a good one, as it places the character in a commonplace scenario, which feels completely unusual for him, taking advantage of his in-character gullibility to create comedy out of it. Or Goku's training with Mr. Popo, which adds more chapters over the manga, since it actually features very unique methods of learning how to master ki sensing, like dodging a lightning, fishing, time traveling, fighting a clone, and even playing Blind Man's buff. The best one among these is the time travel, even though young Mutaroshi faking his injury is something Satan would do, but apparently Koyama is the only one ignoring that. But still, I like the idea. Besides, Toei proved they could also solve some issues raised by the manga itself, like in the Great Saiyaman arc, in which no matter how intelligent she can be, there is no way Videl would immediately deduce Great Saiyaman's true identity, like a pigtails-headed Kuto Shinichi. Therefore, the anime makes a bold move at rewriting the story from scratch, omitting the two robbers from the opening and extending it with more anime-exclusive content, including dolls holding old people hostage on a couch, Gohan's sheepish date, and the exploitation of a baby pterodactyl. Across these episodes, Videl still can't figure out who Great Saiyaman is in actuality. She makes her own assumptions but never deduces the solution all by herself, because it's Gohan who slips it out by mistake. This is such a way more natural flow of events compared to the poor toilet joke of the manga. For crying out loud, I might be the only one who thinks the Garlic Jr. arc isn't as terrible as everybody claims. In fact, I never realized why Garlic received so much hate. The fact he wished for something concrete like immortality definitely makes him a more challenging opponent. Sure, it's got appalling scenes like Maron being an unbearable pin-up stereotype, Muten Roshi and Yamcha keeping up with Kuririn and Piccolo, but watching Gohan deal with Garlic and his Spice Boys without Goku's help feels very refreshing. I do also like Piccolo's plan to release Kami from his bottle, as well as the way their lives are connected to each other. So if one is in pain, the other one suffers the same pain as well. The subplot of Vegeta acting as a Super Saiyan's ambassador is pretty cool too, even though I highly doubt he could nonchalantly breathe in outer space like Frieza. Is it a great arc? No, but it's decent for what it's worth. Now then, what makes a filler bad? Be boring, be unimaginative, contradict the source material at will, make characters act in a contrived way to facilitate plot devices, doing very little with them, and worst of all, stress obnoxious and/or idiotic behaviors up to 11. Let's take the other filler arc, the Other World Tournament, an all-around downgrade compared to the Garlic Jr. arc. Of course, Toei got us used to far worse content, but for being an action-driven story, sure it's very underwhelming. The introductory episode with the build-up of the Otherworld environment was actually interesting. I liked the hierarchy above the four Kaios. I sort of enjoyed Gohan easily defeating Cell. Toei have always depicted Goku as more battle-thirsty than usual, but again it's pretty much in line with his personality, so I'm fine with that. I'm also fine with Goku facing Gohan in the finals. It is predictable, but at least their battle is rather enjoyable. Hiroki Shibata remains the most underappreciated director of the series. All in all, I can surely excuse predictability, but what I cannot excuse is boredom, because the rest of the tournament is mediocre, and a desperate attempt to retrieve the more carefree tone of the early Tenkaichi Budokai, resulting in being more rancid than old-fashioned. An action-driven plot is supposed to engage the audience, not to make them snooze. And I know it's controversial, but I do have mixed feelings about the driving episode. I'm honestly unsure about how to judge it. I kinda like the idea of Piccolo learning how to drive, something he absolutely doesn't need, which makes him the best thing of this episode by default. I like his outfit, I like his talking instructor, and his unlikely competitiveness on the road, which is funny because it makes zero sense. Yet something tells me my opinion would drastically change if Seigasha never animated that filler, because I don't like Hayao Matsui's tendency to fuel character stupidity for the sake of convenience, which already happened during the obnoxious Bulma Ginyu ordeal on Namek, since nobody could recognize Bulma inside the body of a frog, despite Gohan could actually sense Ginyu in Goku's body, see what I mean? Piccolo getting too carried away by his competitiveness is funny, adult Goku acting stupidly is cringe. Can you imagine him staring at the clouds instead of training before the android's arrival, or him basically dragging Piccolo along, kind of a dick move? On top of that, doesn't Chi-Chi own a driving license already? While we're at it, was she the one driving all the way to Kame House in the Saiyan arc? Ah, I forgot. Toei, like Chi-Chi the way she is a nagging and insufferable house lady, because toxic relationships provide so much hilarity. proposing the same joke once or twice is one thing, but it gets incredibly frustrating after a short while. And before someone chews me down, let me rephrase that. The driving episode is not that bad. I only find Piccolo's role more effective than Goku's, and the initial premise is just incredibly stupid. Dragon Ball filler is regardless impossible to both defend and demolish, but in over a decade, I suppose the fandom encountered their personal scapegoats that they release whenever they discuss this topic. Specifically the Garlic Jr. arc and the Copy Vegeta arc. While I don't mean to protect the latter, I'm actually inclined to save the former, because it's much more fun than the Rockabye Budokai. And I also want to deliver a categorical statement. How can these arcs be considered amongst the worst filler category when Yamcha being afraid of heights, anytime they exhibit Chi-Chi's annoying behavior, the fake Namek arc, Bulma's derailment subplot on Namek, Bulma's greed over a pearl despite being already rich on her own, all the cutaways with Bulma complaining on Namek, Ginyu stealing Bulma's body, and Big Brain Vegeta already knowing Frieza destroyed the planet Vegeta, making Raditz a liar by default exist? Those I mentioned are what I regard as bad filler, for being dull, obnoxious, or for retconning the canon story. Now, back to the party filler. Whilst clearly not Uchiyama's bottom, the main plot and the egg subplot might work on paper, since Slice of Life has always been a goldmine, even in modern Dragon Ball, and this one seems like the rightful occasion upon episodes and episodes of Brawl. And you know what else? The egg subplot could have the potential to be as enjoyable as the main one, with this semi-adventurous tone. Unfortunately, my prognostication sounds way too optimistic, as both plots stink. The party plot had a sincere potential to entertain and to establish some unlikely interactions, but instead we do get a commonplace montage and a pretty corny dance segment, which I would expect from a 30s cartoon. It's not the dance the issue itself, but the fact it is indeed very boring. I just can't get invested in something this banal and shabby, and before you address it, no, Vegeta sharing his meal with Bo isn't sufficient. For fuck's sake, that is the only redeemable bit I actually cared for, which does nothing but increase its regrets. I wanted more of this. As for Goku's subplot, something tells me the fact the protagonist is in there, it converts it into the main story of the episode by default. I have to say, it's slightly more tolerable than the party cutscenes, at least it's got more things going on, but again, misery doesn't always love company, as its resolution remains so damn unsatisfying. Goku isn't the sharpest tool in the shed, but the fact it's missing a party just to wait for the eggs to hatch may sound dumb to you, but makes perfect sense to me. Yes, it is plausible, you'd expect him to be this shallow, I'm okay with that. After all, I would also be staring at a nest if the party I should be attending was this boring. Although what's to be disliked about this filler is that it's structured like a video game, since it follows the accurate formula of problem solution, problem solution, problem solution over and over. This is Mickey Mouse Clubhouse level of predictable. The adventures of PB and J Otter were way more elaborate than this bore. Not even Goku getting devoured by a fish brings any effect. Possibly because Uchiyama isn't the sharpest tool in the shed either, and this is coming from the biggest Last House apologists, since nearly anyone thinks their decline occurred after Shida's departure in the Cell arc, but the fact of the matter is they were still decent in that arc, and even in early Buu arc. Their real turning point was in episode 273. That was exactly when Last House officially took a nosedive. Despite they are a very easy target, you shouldn't forget the time which they used to be a great studio, even surpassing Studio Junior at some point. As for the episode, it pains me to consider it the final glimpse of the original run before the end of Z, that until Toriyama came up with Battle of Gods and Modern Dragon Ball in general, which essentially called off this filler. Ha! I personally don't have anything against Slice of Life content, but please be a little more imaginative and less corny. This episode is pretty bad, and I shouldn't be wasting any more time talking about it. So let's move on to the end of Dragon Ball Z. The final canon timeskip takes place in 289, one of those rare in-house episodes following an evident tradition, since whenever an important event happened, Toei would handle it themselves. Take Frieza's introduction in episode 44, Future Trunks going Super Saiyan in 120, Super Saiyan Vegeta in 129, Cell absorbing 18 in 159, and Vegeta acknowledging Kakarot is number 1 in 280. All episodes supervised by Toei's usual suspects, such as Katsuyoshi Nakatsuru, Takeo Ide, and Naoki Miyahara. Such a tradition would continue in GT as well, and Akira Nagami's name would join the supervising roster alongside Ide and Miyahara. And who's behind the said episodes? Mostly former Studio Junior or Last House animators, whom Toei consider trusty for their talent or their adaptability. However, this in-house episode looks a bit dissimilar to the others watched this far, since they shared a copious number of in-house animators without borrowing more from other studios, whereas this one features supplementary names entirely redrawn by Miyahara, whose identities would normally require some wobbly assumptions, but fortunately their Gengas essentially did the job in my place. It appears most of the first half and part of the second represent the last of former cockpit animators on the show. 279 was their final supervision, but 289 actually marks their final appearance overall. Although Masaki Iwani is strangely absent, he must have left the series completely. Anyway, after experiencing any sort of ordeal, like Gods of Destruction, the triple comeback of Frieza, a green-skinned sociopath, a muscular and bald guy who thinks he's Batman, a goat, a Koyama-less Broly and Cell Maximum, Trunks is flying towards Goku's house to pay Goten a visit, but the latter isn't at home because he's training with Goku. This early segment is entirely animated by Miyahara, whose approach isn't really my cup of nails. I still like how he draws impact frames, but his noses will always receive my disapproval as his character resemble swines most of the time. Being this a slice of life episode, there's not much action going on, so it will be a little more difficult to analyze the upcoming events without too many reiterations. Small trivia, interesting how Trunks' average aura color is blue, just like his future counterpart Vegeta, Dodori and Zarbon, which kinda helps differentiate from the main cast having white auras. Modern Dragon Ball no longer features such a distinction, as even Vegeta is a white aura, maybe not to cause any confusion with the Super Saiyan Blue. Trunks enters Gohan's house, whom he finds picking up some books from its library, also meeting up with Videl, who's been looking for Pan. Despite Kazuhito Kikuchi is not my favorite director, his framings basically explain what happened with Gohan's life without word expositions. From his marriage to him fulfilling his dream to become a scholar, this segment explains everything, so don't tell, as they say. Miyahara also tackles Satan on TV, announcing a new Tenkaichi Budokai, striking some passable poses with non-existent in-betweening. Not certain whether it's poorly looped on purpose, because the same identical issue is to be exhibited in a moment. In the meantime, Miyahara's animation presumably ends before Gohan telling Trunks about Goten's location, as his ear cartilage looks shakier and his line work a bit more unpolished, which coincides with Masayuki Sato's section, marking the beginning of the cockpit streak of this episode, or a cock streak. The man behind the notorious cut of 279 and the character designer of the One Piece film Strong World animates the limited sparring between Goku and Goten, as well as Vegeta and Bulma's arrival. This cut over here is the scene I previously cited, as either Miyahara forgot to add the proper in-betweening or Yamauchi is just a superior director. I mean, Sato is a great talent, and whenever a great talent is diminished by a dull choreography makes flattering way more unjustifiable. This is Sato under a skilled director. This is Sato under a skilled director's pupil. I sincerely loathe how his key animation was handled here, although nice use of the classic training theme from Kame Sennin's training. Either way, Bulma is upset at Goku for ignoring her for 5 straight years, which she replies by pointing out her Obasan level aging, to her utter indignation. Perhaps wishing for longer eyelashes and for rounder buttocks didn't really slow down her aging after all. Then Vegeta asks why Goku would be so willing to enter the new Tenkaichi Budokai in spite of being no longer that challenging. The reason is Goku's interest in a mysterious warrior who doesn't appear to be an alien or an android, but a mere human. To put it simply, the same boy who lent a hand during the Moro arc might face Goku on equal terms. Isao Sugimoto was difficult to ID under Mazunaga's supervision and manages to be even more difficult under Miyahara. His section possibly ends before Trunks' landing, as another cockpit regular, Chisato Ikehira, takes over, presumably covering all the following segment until the end of part A. 4-year-old Pan is also going to partake in the tournament, and so are Goten and Trunks, with Vegeta forcing the latter. And since the junior competition was cancelled, Pan will be aggregated with the adults, just like in the early Tenkaichi Budokai arcs. Part B wraps up Cockpit's experience on the series, and who else but Keisuke Masunaga in the flesh would take on such a task, ending his Dragon Ball time just like he started it. Redrawn by Miyahara. No kidding, his art normally looking so distinct is narrowly unrecognizable here, which quite frankly sounds a bit unreasonable. The original Genghis worked out just fine, I just don't view the necessity. Nevertheless, Masunaga deals with a really competent filler segment in which Pan spends some spare time in the amusement park nearby, beating the high strike attraction very easily to the audience's shock. This scene is the most Masunaga-esque bit of the episode, starting with his mirror mallet Pan uses to hit the target, and his trademark smoke and impact frame left surprisingly unfazed. Though I find it odd that Goku and Pan were redrawn, but at least we get to observe his funny expressions on the generic folks. It represents what the previous episode should have been in the first place. It's charming, it's funny and very well developed. Pan remains an extremely entertaining new entry, just like in Superhero, and my hope is that she will be treated way better in the upcoming material than GT ever did. Back to the breakdown, I suppose there cannot be any anniversary without mentioning Naoto Shishida tackling the little punk who is running away with his stolen goods, dropping Pan's ice cream by accident. While this is still far from his peak and Miyahara's redrawings are a persistent hindrance, it's a neat little segment in which Goku is afraid Pan might slaughter the young thief, but in actuality she bursts into copious tears because the dogs are eating her ice cream. Curiously, Shida's final work in Z involves a theft, just like in his first scene at the beginning of the series, in which a saber-toothed tiger stole Gohan's hat during another filler sequence. What a coincidence. I indisputably like his current hype guy status, but a part of me would want him to supply more slice of life, as seen in Dragon Quest. Anyway, the new Budokai is about to get started and the gang finally reunites, with Kuririn and Piccolo not participating this time and acting as mere spectators. It's of course animated by Koala Nose, the Toshiyuki Kano, who is the only artist not suffering Miyahara's redrawings because his approach kinda resembles it. Nothing much to comment on, apart from his reasonably slimmer contribution, which makes sense given his involvement in the Kaioshin Realm climax. Next up is another toy regular Akira Nagami, animating Goku meeting his son's father-in-law, the world savior Mr. Satan, to inform him of the Saiyan's participation to Satan's despair, as well as of the possibility a mysterious fighter might win against either of them, since he is a reincarnation of the evil Buu defeated 3 episodes ago. His name is Oob. Much like Kanno, Inagami's presence is expectedly limited. It doesn't have much going on action-wise, apart from the weird boyfriends and Boo knocking back some grape juice. At long last, our favorite nameless announcer is proclaiming the beginning of the 28th Tenkaichi Budokai, so each contestant makes his way outside before the habitual draw. This final segment is provided by one of Yamamuro's animators, Akemi Ueda, who joined Shindo Pro in the artificial humans arc credited as Akemi Seiki, which was her newbie last name, but she must have likely gotten married prior to the Buu arc airing, lastly adopting her husband's last name. Her Yamamura-esque artwork pops up on the audience cheering and on Boo's admirers, quite progressive, but as a whole she ends up being overwhelmed by a dominant supervisor like everyone else. All in all, I did enjoy this episode, it's mostly slice of life, but it's done properly. While Miyahara's fundamentalism still leaves me skeptical, Kazuhito Kikuchi's output remains a mystery, since he proved to be not that bad in the past, but I'd regardless rank him underneath the likes of Yamauchi and Ueda, because his performance often felt like rocksteady to me, not too imaginative, not too concrete. It's maybe my limit, but I don't seem to fully understand him. Moreover, it's kinda strange to bump into a toy episode without Takeo Ide. I wonder if we'll find him again. Next episode. I said next episode. Fine. 290 is the last Studio Live episode to be both animated and supervised by Bizawa. Thank Kami, you might think, since he lost any hope of redemption upon Kanon's departure. The fact is not as dreadful as in the past doesn't make him qualified by default. His approach remains utterly unappealing and his key animation is as monotonous as ever. Fortunately, this episode can rely on Yoshihiro Ueda's unique pigmentation one final time before the end of the canon series. As for its content, Goku reveals Oob is indeed Evil Boo's reincarnation, who is up to face him in a tournament. However, since he's very bashful and insecure, Goku proceeds to insult his whole family so that he can fight for real, driven by his own wrath. The main battles featured in 291, the very final episode of Dragon Ball Z, delivered by the Ishikawa and Mamura pairing in which Oob begins his offensive. Goku can counter his kick just fine, yet it deals more harm than expected, so he can retaliate for real. Ishikawa animates a solid portion of the main battle, whose sassy approach indeed works on Goku expressing his excitement. This might actually be his most compelling moment in the series, as this section has never been this animated, also enhanced by Mamura cinematography. It might not reach Yamauchi insanity level, but for a director globally regarded with his ups and downs, this looks like a very notable performance. He literally wastes no framing. His choreography tries to bring some OG vibes back, utterly succeeding also thanks to Ishikawa's execution. For a show that got so used to beams and invisible opponents, bringing back punches, kicks, throws, double axes is a breath of fresh air. I'm not sure whether it's considered an underrated fight, but I might be inclined to regard this as underrated as opposed to Piccolo vs 17, which is rightfully rated because if 100 people think it's underrated, I think it's no longer that underrated after all. But I digress. Goku retaliates Oob's initial offensive, but the runt seems to learn how to fight right while he's fighting his opponent, so Tetsuya Saiki takes on the following segment with more smeary elbowing and headbutting, in which the gang is sincerely impressed by Boo's reincarnation. Saiki's blocky timing works just fine, and overall the segment means a lot for him, as he's the only animator who appeared in both the first and last episode of Z, from Gohan chasing a Lepidopteron to the final canon battle, a considerable leap from last house like Shida, yet on a minor degree. Ishikawa doesn't always get to redraw his Shida-esque rough artwork during the fight, but he definitely polished up his indoor section with Satan and Boo. His hand poses are more like an uneven take of Shida's wormy fingers, and the two pals do witness their power struggle, which manages to partially destroy the ring. Saiki's section ends with Oob getting the upper hand as he delivers an aerial blow, proceeding to throw Goku skywards and then double Xing to the ground. We're once again dealing with a competent scene, driven by another solid directional display in which Mamura manages to seamlessly frame each hit. As for its ID, my guess is on K-Production regular Matsumoto, given its similarity to Ishikawa, but I'm not completely sure. Upon Oob's furious assault, it seems Goku is down to the count, but he calmly emerges from the ring debris, ending the first half as the battle continues in the second, this time falling to the invisible bad habit which might be Kumiko Rikoshi's section. Judging from her production material, she's one of those Yamamuro lookalikes, and I wouldn't be astonished to discover she animated this scene. That here is something Yamamura would draw for sure. Goku is merely having fun, whereas Oob is determined to win at all cost, for the sake of his family, leading to the highlight, brought by the best animator of this episode, Takeo Ide, in which Oob fires a fully powered Kiai, further smashing the battlefield, and upon that he can propel himself with the ring debris right towards the target, but Goku dodges his offensive, leaving Oob wide open to an out of bounds after a rubble hits him on the back. He didn't partake in the final toy entry, but at least Ide got to partake in the final episode overall, with a true banger. He's such a monster this era. It's so great to see him at full force after a couple of restrained performances. His hasty timing, his black and white action lines, the godly expressivity, the so absolutely needed its highlight before its conclusion, which could only be brought by a massive finisher like Ide. Oob's bug eyes come off as so cartoonish, that's why his stats killed. Tier 5, please queue up. While Oob tries to pull himself together, Goku is charging a Kamehameha, but the ring crumbles entirely, which would cause Oob to peremptorily lose, but is immediately saved by Goku. The subsequent section, in which he decides to leave everything and everyone behind to train Oob, is handled by Studio Carpenter, though I'm still uncertain whether Manaka or Fukushima scene comes first. The only concrete evidence is the Genga illustrating and disbelieving Goten and Trunks, who were actually bothered by Goku's decision in the original layout, possibly drawn by Fukushima because of his italic letter A. I hope Genga hunters won't kill me if I happen to get this idea wrong, but the fact of the matter is, this is the only proof of Carpenter's presence so far. If my assumption is correct, then it might mean Manaka's scene preceded this moment, specifically during Goku's conversation with Oob, while Supervisor Akamada would take on Goku's departure, since this impact frame looks quite familiar. If anything, everyone feels unhappy by his apparently selfish attitude, with the sole exception of Piccolo and Vegeta, who do comprehend Goku only wants to have fun battling and training, not caring about this competition on the slightest. And like I said before, feel free to believe whatever you like, but if you think such a behavior makes no sense, I do think the total opposite, as it makes way too much sense for him to go training a boy who has barely known for half an hour. Of course, people are indeed selfish, but also demonstrate their more selfless side once in a while. As Jim Morrison would claim, people are strange. And unpredictable too. Sometimes you're simply unable to predict other people's actions. You may either expect them to be stoops or plain devilish, either polite or rude, either funny or boring, either selfish or selfless, and Goku has been both across the series. Considering he sacrificed himself twice to save a planet that downplays his strength, I guess he can take the liberty to think about his own amusement for once, even to the detriment of everything else. Just like when you decide to move to start all over again, even though you're aware of what you decided to renounce inevitably. After a still montage where we find out that Tenkaichi Budokai was cancelled and Pan won against Goten, Shingo Ishikawa takes the honor of animating the last ever scene of the canon series, with Goku and Oob looking forward to getting stronger, releasing all their excitement. And thus, after 291 episodes, Dragon Ball Z encounters its conclusion, ending the original run along with it. Regardless of what you may think about its ending, this series finale is still satisfactory. The main battle is well choreographed, with each scene being the undisputed highlight, leaving the impression of K-Production's best episode of the series. This of course marks the conclusion of our very long journey as well. Oof, sure it was a long one. I hope you stuck with me speaking for over an hour. I hope you enjoyed this hell of a ride in which I explained what brought me to waste my brain cells in the first place. I still regret doing nothing from 2019 to 2022 up to this day, but fortunately I mended my ways to get back from what I had started. I got so many questions demanding a reply. Could I get better numbers in the past 7 years? Yes, I could indeed. Could I handle situations better in the past 7 years? I could too. Could a few video series receive better feedback? They could for sure. But in the end of the day, what would I have done in my lifetime if that guy had never talked about Elephant's Trunks back in 2005? What if YouTube never existed to begin with? This, folks, explains the key: existence and action. Life includes existing and acting, and if you decide not to act, you cannot obviously lose, but you cannot win either. Personally, I cannot predict the future, and you know what else? So what? If I cannot predict what I'm going to do in an hour, what makes you think I can predict what I'm going to do in 10 years? Future is our tidal wave, and if you don't want to overthink, you simply have to ride it. Live day to day. In fact, after this journey, I still don't know what I'm going to do next. How long will my next video be? 7 minutes? 30 minutes? Another hour long? Nobody knows. I also don't know if this video will make it or not, but again, if you don't try it, you cannot lose. As far as I'm concerned, I truly had to recollect part of my memories for such an occasion, as I felt the need to make a huge effort after 7 years. I had fun recording routes and writing a long-ass document as a plain metaphor of the journey, which showcased what I've learned across 7 years. Again, I hope I didn't bore you. Until then, be sure to hit the sub button below if you want more journeys like this one in the future. It's been a fun time, till next time.